welcome to another video review, and today we're reviewing Joker, the much anticipated 2019 hit film. I'm going to call it a hit already because I know it's going to be a hit. I had the pleasure of finally seeing this movie. You want to know about the Joker? Is this movie as good as the critics are saying? Is it a spellbinding performance by Joaquin Phoenix, one of my favorite actors of all time? How good of a Batman movie is it? How good of a character-driven film is the Joker? All of these things I'm gonna answer yes to, pretty much. It is as good as the hype has indicated ahead of time. Without spoiling anything here at the beginning of the video, I think Joaquin Phoenix gives an Oscar-worthy performance. I know a lot of people are kind of up in arms right now because, 10 years ago when The Dark Knight came out, nobody said, hey, Heath Ledger, nobody's ever going to top him. I won't say that Joaquin Phoenix tops Heath Ledger's performance. I think it just kind of stands on its own. So I'm not going to sit here and debate, hey, who is the better Joker? I think his performance stands on its own. And, as we've seen over the years, you can kind of take each person that's played the Joker and kind of put them on a shelf, and they each kind of brought their own quirks to the role. And I think Joaquin Phoenix's take on the Joker is a very, obviously mentally disturbed man, as the Joker character kind of always has been. And he gives a powerhouse performance that I will literally be stunned if he does not walk away with an Academy Award. So, with that being said, the Joker, it's dark, it's gritty, it's a gruesome movie at times, hard to watch at times, I guess, some of the awkwardness of it. It's also much more of a film about mental illness than I thought it would be going into it. How is it as a Batman movie? That's going to be something that I think Batman fans are going to debate for years to come. My takeaway from seeing it, and again, I've only seen it this one time, it's a movie I, really look forward to seeing again at some point. An interesting take on the character. I think it could stand on its own as its own separate story, and that's what they've already come out and said, is this is its own self-contained thing. It's not going to be tied to any other aspect of what's going on in DC in terms of their films right now. That whole thing's kind of a mess. So you don't have to worry about that. With that being said, I think walking in, walking out of it in terms of a movie about mental illness, I think it's a really powerful movie about what happens if you're not paying attention to somebody who clearly has a problem. It's good on that level. It definitely has something to say about that. It's really hard to talk about this movie without spoilers, so the front portion of this is going to be really loaded with not a lot, because it's really hard to not spoil this movie. Overall, I really, really enjoyed it. It's one of the best movies I've seen in 2019. Is it the best movie I've seen in 2019? I don't know yet. Year's not over. It is one of the best, though. It's a gripping performance by a man who always deserves your attention in terms of his acting. The other thing that's really interesting about this movie is directed by Todd Phillips, who is known for the Hangover movies and not known as someone who makes dark, gritty, character-driven movies. He did a fantastic job. He wrote this, he directed this. It's definitely like Warner Brothers kind of, gave him a lot leeway here to make the movie he wanted to make. And they do some interesting thing with other characters in this movie, which we'll get to in the spoiler section of this review. But I think some of the other performances in this movie are really good as well. The problem is Joaquin Phoenix is just such a good actor that he outshines literally anyone else in this movie. And I think come awards season, nobody's going to be talking about any other performance than this one. With that being said, in terms of reviewing this movie, in terms of giving it a score, which I'm going to just front load here before we talk about spoilers of this movie, because there's a lot to discuss. I'm giving this movie an A-. There's one little bit about it I had a little bit of a problem with, but besides that, I think it's as close to perfect as I could have expected. It's definitely worth your time, definitely worth going to the theater and seeing. Don't miss it, is what I would say. So, putting all that aside here, we're going to get to the spoilers section of this review. So if you don't want to know anything about Joker without seeing it, put pause on this, review, come back to it later, because now I'm going to talk about spoilers of the movie. So kind of set yourself aside. So be warned, I'm going to spoil the shit out of this movie now. So the Joker is a man named Arthur Fleck in this universe. One of the few, very few complaints I have about this movie is obviously it's set in Gotham, but we knew this movie was filmed in the Bronx and parts of New York. One of my very small minor gripes about that in this movie is it doesn't look like Gotham City, it just looks like New York. I think that was very purposely done in the case of this movie, but it kind of took me out of the element for it. You know, any other movie that we've seen, Batman movie, Gotham's always been a character on its own. Here, Gotham City just looks like New York. And that was it was a little bit hard for me to kind of shake that during the movie, but I get it, and it makes perfect sense for the movie that they're trying to make here. That being said, you know, we're greeted right away to the character of Arthur Fleck. He is a man society has pretty much shit on. He's very downridden. He lives with his mother. I would assume he's probably in about his 40s, maybe late 30s, early 40s. They don't really say, though. The movie takes place in 1981. So he lives with his mother in a crappy apartment. He works as a kind of a rent-a-clown, so to speak. So he does certain things throughout the movie, like one of his random gigs is he's one of those, you know, wacky sign people in front of a store, you know, flipping around like, hey, come shop here. At one point, he is a clown at a children's hospital. You know, he has different jobs as a clown, which is kind of an interesting aspect to the character. So he's already very familiar with like putting on face paint and those kind of things. And he basically, the whole movie, it's a very depressing movie, by the way. He basically he's just down on his luck, and things just keep happening to him, and it keeps getting worse and worse for him. And you can kind of see this mental disdain in him. There's some interesting scenes where he kind of meets with a therapist for his mental problems, and at one point, she just tells him, like, hey, the city's cut funding, so you're not going to be able to meet me anymore. At one point, it's mentioned in the movie, he's on 7 different mental medications, and he kind of asks, like, how am I going to get these medications? And it's kind of like, I don't know. And there's stuff like that in this movie, and it's just more and more he gets downtrodden, and it's a hard life for him. And one of the things that happens in this movie is, in the very beginning, he gets beat up by a group of punk kids, and then his work gets pissed because they think he stole the sign, but they don't understand that the sign was actually broken over his head and whatnot. And so one of the other people that works with him is kind of like, hey, you know, you need to protect yourself out there, and gives him a gun. So he has a gun for a while, and then you kind of see him just be, you know, weird with the gun and kind of acting things out. If there's one thing I'll compare this movie to, is it is more Taxi Driver than it is a Batman movie. And it's very obvious that the Joker in this movie is very much like Travis Bickle from that movie. It's almost beat for beat that character, and where society has just kind of forgotten him. And so he has some scenes where he's in his apartment, you know, and he's waving the gun around and stuff. And then he has a gig, it goes bad because he brings the gun with him to this children's hospital. And he's kind of dancing around, drops the gun. People see it, he gets fired. So he's, you know, not in a good place. And he happens to be on a subway train going home. And these 3 punk, like, I'd say Wall Street punk guys basically start giving him shit. And he kills them. He straight up just pulls out the gun and shoots them. And at first it's kind of like played off as self-defense, but he clearly just straight up murders the third person. And he's obviously likes it and kind of decides like, hey, I like murdering people. And so that's kind of the theme that starts going through this movie. He starts breaking mentally down, and it kind of continues, it spirals out of control. Obviously there's this is seen in the trailers too, there's a young woman and her daughter, so she's a single mother that live in the apartment complex. And one of the greatest tricks, I think, in this movie that really drives home the point of mental illness, which is probably the biggest part of this entire movie. And so he starts having a relationship with this lady, and it's revealed later in the movie that that was all made up in his head. Like, he literally had concocted this whole relationship with this woman, and none of it happened. Like, the woman still lives in the apartment complex, but he never had a relationship with her. Just things spiral out of control. The character that Robert De Niro plays is kind of like a late night talk show host that gets a tape of his stand-up from this comedy club that's in Gotham City. And he plays it, and obviously, you know, at some point in this movie, Arthur Fleck, he got up on stage, he's super bombed really bad, and so this guy's making fun of him. And obviously that just makes him snap more. There's another subplot in this movie where his very, very mentally ill mother tells him, and this is how the Waynes kind of fit into this movie. She basically, she keeps telling him throughout the movie, hey, I keep writing Thomas Wayne. I used to work for him 30 years ago. We really need help right now. We need money. And she keeps saying, like, hey, I keep sending him these letters. So one day he decides, I'm going to open it up, and that's when he discovers, oh shit, Thomas Wayne is my father, and he had an affair with my mother. And when this happened in the movie, I was kind of like, I don't like this. It's played off, though. It's not what actually happens. It turns out that his mother was mentally ill. She was committed at one point, and his origin is that he was adopted. You don't know who his parents are. And I think that's perfect for the character of the Joker, because you don't know where he came from. And I think that was played very, very well in this movie. One of the other aspects of the movie that I didn't care for is how much of a dick Thomas Wayne is portrayed as. And I think the point of it was, you know, society as a whole is just really, really terrible right now in this movie. And the upper society especially, and he was just part of that. But Thomas Wayne, you know, in the comics and TV shows, for the most part, unless it's an Elseworlds story or something, has always been a very kind-hearted man. He was a doctor. In this movie, he's a very rich guy running for mayor. And there is a really, really fascinating and interesting scene with Arthur and Bruce Wayne. One of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's really impactful. Basically, you know, things spiral out of control. He kind of murders some other people. Again, I don't want to spoil every single thing in this movie. The movie itself concludes with that late night talk show guy calls him and says, hey, I want you on my show. And that's where the Joker kind of snaps. He is snapped at one point. His mother has a stroke. She's in the hospital, and he kills her. He straight up just murders her. And I mean, obviously it's not his real mother when he found out, but he straight up murders her. And then he kind of goes home. Two of his buddies come over that he used to work with him at this rent-a-clown place, and he straight up murders the one guy, the guy who gave him the gun. And then the other guy he lets go, because that other guy never gave him any shit. It's a really disturbing scene, but really interesting. And so after that, then the end of this movie is he goes on talk show dressed up as the Joker, wants to be called the Joker, comes out, and it's a really disturbing, like, he says a couple jokes, people laugh, and then he straight up just admits to killing those 3 people on the subway, and it just tanks from there. Like, he straight up just admits it. He says he doesn't care. You kind of really see the effects of mental illness, and he straight up shoots Robert De Niro's character on air. And that propels this entire city into this utter chaos and this utter rioting and everything. So the end of this movie, which I thought was probably the best part of the movie, is obviously he gets arrested. He's in a cop car. They're going away. At the same time, the Waynes are coming out of the Zorro movie. So you have your, you know, Bruce Wayne murder scene, because they have to have that in anything that's ever tied to Batman. But I think in this movie, it was done more justice. And so you have the scene where the Waynes are murdered. It's not done by the Joker. And then the end of this movie is him there's a car accident. These Joker people, like, again, people have taken over the city. Like, it's kind of nuts how this riot just kind of goes insane. But they basically break him out of the car. They kind of lay him on the car because he was in an accident. He gets up, he kind of smiles, and the crowd cheers him on. And that's kind of how the movie ends. There's kind of I wouldn't even call it a post-credit scene, but the actual end of the movie is, you know, he makes it to Arkham. And this was the whole point, is he makes it to Arkham, and he has a scene with another therapist, and it's implied that he killed her, but it was brought up kind of after I was discussing with my friends and my girlfriend and stuff after the movie, is you don't know, did he actually kill her, or was it just imagined in his head? Because he's able to just walk out of this asylum room and dance around, and there's nobody there. So you're left to wonder, did he make that up, or was that real? And I think that was the best part of this movie, is not only is it a self-contained movie about the Joker and about giving him an origin, it's also very much a movie about the effects of mental illness. And I think that in and of itself is also one of the most fascinating aspects about this Joker movie. That's pretty much it. I really don't have any negative things to say about it. It's really bizarre. Like, I went into this movie very cautiously optimistic, because I just couldn't get over the fact of, like, we're going to go into a Joker movie that's a self-contained thing that has nothing to do with anything else Batman related. It's its own thing. How is this going to work? How is this going to make sense? How are people going to like this, you know? And it turns out to be not only one of the best movies of the year, but probably Joaquin Phoenix's best acting role in his entire career. So, I mean, again, A minus. I loved it. I can't wait to see it again. I look forward to seeing it when it comes out on like 4K Blu-ray. But it's definitely worth your time. It's one of the best movies of the year. As a Batman fan, I walked out happy with how this movie ended, with how this movie was. So I really enjoyed it. Hopefully I didn't spoil too much of it for you. I hope you enjoyed this video review. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.